Perfect. So yeah, I'll just introduce what we're going to be talking about today. Everybody that's here, welcome. My name is Brad Harris, and I'm joined by my esteemed London-based colleague, Catherine Pollock. And we're going to be talking today about freshman and sophomore college counseling and how starting early in that process with college counseling can help you flourish in high school, in addition to as a college applicant when the time comes. So, if you're a parent and you have some kids that are just entering high school or still in the early, couple of years of high school, perhaps you have an older child who's already been through the process and you're thinking maybe it would be advantageous to start it earlier for your younger child. Hopefully this presentation kind of gives you an overview of our thoughts of the value of getting started early. So just to kind of kick things off, Catherine, we've seen some pretty striking trends over the last few cycles now, and most especially with COVID, cycles of college applications. What are these big trends that are affecting how we think about counseling?
Yeah, thanks, Brad, and thanks everyone for being here. I think, looking at these trends, and we're going to kind of focus on 4 key trends here. It's sort of just a good way, I think, to set the stage and set the scene a little bit for younger students who, aren't necessarily waking up and thinking about their college application every day, but know that it is on the horizon. So having an idea of the trends over the past couple of years, sort of at the back of your mind, I think can help at certain decision points in high school, and can really kind of give you a perspective of what the college process might be like as you get more into sort of the junior and senior years. So the first trend, which, I'm probably not the first person to have said this, I'm sure most of the people on this call have already heard this, is really just more applicants than ever before. There was a question about sort of how the pandemic in the past couple of years would affect applicant numbers. And what we've really seen pretty much across the board is increasing numbers of applicants. So unsurprisingly, that means increasing competitiveness. And we're seeing more applicants both domestically and internationally, which is a really interesting trend to see across the board. So, not something to necessarily add stress early on, but just a helpful kind of thing to keep in the back of your mind. The next really big consideration is colleges and universities in the US are using their wait lists more than ever before. So for those who don't know, when you apply to college, there's of course the option of getting accepted or rejected, and there's also the possibility of getting put on a wait list where the college tells you will make a decision about your application status a little bit down the line. And we're really seeing that colleges are using that more than ever, for a variety of reasons that we can get into. We could easily talk about for 5 or 10 minutes. But yeah, what that means for students is, they won't necessarily have that clear-cut decision on the big decision day that they might have seen their older brother or older sister have. And it might mean that they have to reach out to schools and sort of solidify their interest with those schools to hopefully get off the wait list if that is one of their first choices. The next one, and this is probably, I would say, of these, probably the most important ones for freshmen and sophomores to understand, and freshman and sophomore families, is this question of test optional. So over the past, year or so of the pandemic, pretty much, I think, Brad, is it every school has gone test optional? Effectively every
To my
school.
knowledge, every school.
Yeah, so colleges and universities have gone test optional, basically as a way to recognize that due to, social distancing and lockdown and all that, students may not have been able to take a test, take an SAT or an ACT. So what they're saying to students is you can submit an SAT score or an ACT score, or you cannot, and we'll consider your application either way. Whereas previously, most schools would have required that. What we have seen sort of, we don't want to make any concrete analysis of this, but what we have seen sort of from early on trends is that submitting a test score that is within that school's SAT or ACT range does increase your chance of admittance. So a little bit what's happened is schools have been able to increase their applicant number, decrease their acceptance rate, and sort of create this idea that, okay, maybe I can apply to this school without my test score, but in reality, applying with the test score in that range is still going to be your best chance at getting accepted. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. And, of course, we do have students who did get in with the test optional option this year, but definitely it's our recommendation to, moving forward, if schools continue to be test optional, to still try to take an SAT or an ACT if it's feasible and makes sense for the student. And just one caveat to add to that, parents and students might also see the term test blind, which is very different. There are some schools that are test blind, and that means we won't look at your SAT and ACT. It's not a long list of schools at this point, but there are some schools that are saying, we don't accept test scores, and that's a pretty small list. But that is important to sort of distinguish that from all schools going test optional over the past year. And the last thing is higher admissions rate for early applications. This is, for many years been the case that if you apply early decision, particularly to, this sort of hyper competitive schools, you have, at least, 2 times, if not more, higher acceptance rates. And really what we saw the past couple of years is that sort of gap between the early decision acceptance rate and the regular decision acceptance rate is widening. So you look at some of the Ivy Leagues and we're talking about, early decision, perhaps, mid-teens acceptance rate, and we're talking about regular decision, 3, 4, 5%. So we are seeing a huge sort of an increasing gap in acceptance rate between early decision and regular decision. And, what that really means is that if at all possible, it is great for students to apply early if they are confident in where they want to go. Great. And I will hand it off to Brad, who's going to talk about the timeline a bit more.
Yeah. So thanks for that broad overview of the trends, Catherine. So what does that mean for your child, if your child is a freshman or a sophomore, or what does it mean for you if you're listening in and you're a freshman or a sophomore, you're just starting high school? All of these trends basically line up to suggest to us that it's really important to be thoughtful about high school from the very beginning, if you can. This puts a little bit more emphasis on having a sense of direction developed earlier, learning the college landscape earlier. So, broad strokes, 9th and 10th grade, we're focused on, 3 different categories of high school activity, high school effort, high school attention. And we add to that list as you get on to your upperclassmen years, junior and senior year. By far, the most important thing all 4 years of high school is your courses and your grades. We're going to say a little bit more about that later on, but essentially every school is going to focus on the rigor that your courses represent. How rigorous are your courses balanced against the grades that you've gotten? And there's a little bit of a calculation there. Should you optimize for rigor versus getting all A's? We're going to have more to say about that in a few minutes here. But that is like number one, the focus that we emphasize for freshmen and sophomores, and it continues right through fall, junior and senior year. Extracurricular activities start right from the very beginning of high school. And there's different ways to think about extracurricular activities as you progress through high school. Catherine's going to say a little bit more about this later. I probably will too. Freshman year is a great time to explore different kinds of extracurricular activities, different sports, potentially different jobs, inside of school, outside of school, volunteer activities. Sophomore year is a time to start focusing on what really makes you happy and what really helps you add value to your community. So those are really important. A lot of people we work with that join, into counseling later on in high school, maybe are trying to make up for a little bit of lost time with extracurriculars and really put in the hours, while they're upperclassmen, when they're busier than ever. So, freshman and sophomore year is a great opportunity to start thinking about this. There's another category of efforts called demonstrated interest, and we're going to go into this a little bit more later as well. But it's never too early to start demonstrating interest in colleges. And that breaks down into 2 main benefits. One, there's over 4,000 colleges in the United States alone. So it's really never too early for students, freshmen and sophomores, to start, looking at different schools around the country, getting a sense of what differentiates different schools. What is the difference between a university and a college? What is the difference between being on a campus with 5,000 undergraduates versus 35,000 undergraduates? There's all kinds of differences that are great to start paying attention to and warming up to a little bit early, so that by the time you're a junior and a senior and you're creating the list of schools you might want to apply to, you don't just feel overwhelmed. Like you have to just put a list together with no background. The other big benefit of demonstrated interest over time is that schools will recognize that you have shown interest in them, for example, for 3 or 4 years. And that might make you potentially an applicant that they're going to pay a little bit more attention to once you apply. That demonstrated interest can give those schools confidence that you might actually attend the school if you're given an acceptance offer, and that really matters. So we're going to talk more about that later, but among all the different parts of the application and the college planning process, we're really focused on those 3 in the first 2 years of high school: courses, grades, extracurriculars, and demonstrated interest. So let's overview this again, Catherine. We step back as counselors. We know that as upperclassmen, rising seniors, we're addressing multiple categories of the application. Perhaps you could say a little bit more about how we focus on this in the early years.
Yeah, definitely. And one quick thing I just forgot to mention at the beginning, we will have a sort of dedicated Q&A period at the end, but everyone can feel free to pop any questions into the Q&A right now, because I know we're covering a lot of ground. So feel free to put them in at the end or now, whenever they come up. So yeah, this is sort of, a really, really broad overview of the sort of half dozen or so different things that an admissions counselor will look at. As a freshman, as a sophomore, you don't necessarily need to be thinking about all of them, but it is helpful just to sort of get a little bit of a heads up. So your spring and junior year, not like recommendation letter, I've never heard of that before. You kind of at least have heard the term, tends to ease the anxiety and stress a little bit if you're at least familiar with these. But yeah, like Brad kind of said, there are 3 really here that we want to focus on. So I'll just kind of get into those. We'll start getting into those in a little bit more detail now. So yeah, the first one is courses and grades. And like Brad mentioned, it says courses and grades for a reason. It's not just about, does the student have straight A's? That is obviously the traditional way that people often think about transcripts and representing a strong transcript, but it's also about what courses the student decided to take. So there we're really talking about how rigorous are the courses, and really, I would say, do the courses, tell a story? Can we get a sense of the student, not to make it too sort of humanities, but can we get a sense of the student from the courses that they're taking? So first, talking about the course selection side of things, the number one thing is rigor and challenge. And, that doesn't mean challenge or rigor beyond a student's means, but within each student's sort of wheelhouse, finding honors courses or AP courses that can really provide them with a challenge. I think that's the simplest way to put it. And often families, will ask in sort of, perhaps a nervous way, my school doesn't offer APs, or, I go to this school that's organized a bit differently and we don't have honors courses. Is that a problem? The short answer is no, not at all, really, for 2 reasons. One is that these admissions counselors are, experts on high schools, and generally they have a sense of your high school when you're applying there, and they're able to look at your school's profile, so they will know if your school is not offering AP courses. But the second thing is that there are opportunities to academically challenge yourself outside of school. So let's say that, you are really, into coding and your school doesn't necessarily have the most advanced coding curriculum. Looking at your local community college, or even your local college or university, looking online, there's really an endless array of different ways to challenge yourself independently. So it does not necessarily have to be always in the traditional, AP model or honors course model. The next thing that we just wanted to highlight, which Brad will talk about a little bit more, is taking 4 years of a language. So obviously most high schools don't require that, but it is something that we absolutely recommend if it is feasible for a student to take the language all 4 years and to really show that dedication there. Then the next thing to highlight for courses is really, for the STEM and science slash, math students out there. If you do sort of get a sense your freshman and sophomore year that you are more inclined to the STEM side of things, one thing you really want to keep in mind is making sure that you take physics and calculus. So, there are obviously different options, AP or not, AB or BC, and that depends on the student. But if you are really into sort of that STEM side of things, thinking about your transcript, beginning with freshman year and making sure that you sort of angle yourself towards being able to take physics and calculus at some point is really, really important. I would say both for college application, but also just to decide if you really like it. I think that's a good litmus test to say, like, am I really a STEM person? Do I enjoy these classes? So again, sort of balancing what's good for the college application and what's good for the student. They often go hand in hand. And then grades, we're really trying to find that sort of elusive balance between doing well and challenging yourself. So like I mentioned before, if a student is getting straight A's, that is obviously great and, really, really impressive. But if they're sort of coasting through that, that's when sort of a sign we need to introduce some challenge. And if a student has decided to take 5 APs and is really, really struggling, that's a sign that, we probably need to drop some of these APs, both to make sure that the courses, that the grades, stay above sort of, let's say, that baseline level, but also just so that they can sort of stay above water, and mental health and all that is in consideration as well. And yeah, the next line is, in general, getting a B in a harder class is preferable to just getting straight A's in all easy classes. And students will often come to us with the question of, should I take the standard level course where I know I can get that A, or should I take the harder class where I know I can get that B? And yeah, really, I think taking the harder class is often the way to go. And I always say, particularly, it's the way to go if it's something that the student is interested in. So if it's a STEM student and it's physics, go for the AP. If it's a really, history inclined student and we're talking about AP US history, definitely go for the AP. So if it aligns with your interest, that's even more of a reason to take that sort of extra step. And yeah, so I think, Brad, actually, if you could talk a little bit about class rank, because I know for the international audience, it's less of a phenomenon, but if you could just
Sure.
go into that a bit.
Yeah, just to preview a tool that, counselors, college counselors will use, we certainly use all the time, is looking at where you will ultimately line up with your peers at your school. And just the intel to keep in mind here is, when you start putting together your college list, one of the ways that we help you see what is a reach school, what is a target school, what is a safety school is, statistically, historically, where have other kids from your school been accepted or not? And depending on where you line up in your class, lots of colleges and universities will traditionally make a habit of taking 2 to 4 kids from a particular high school, let's say. And so it's very useful to gauge your chances of acceptance at a particular school based on where you line up in your class. And so that's just another metric that we use to help you create a really well-balanced college list when it comes time to apply as a rising senior. So as a freshman and a sophomore, these are things to pay attention to. You want to play your own game and pursue your own path with some awareness of how you are doing with respect to your peers and in your particular environment. Are you taking advantage of all the opportunities Catherine and I have been outlining so far? Because class rank is one of those really useful tools. Now, as Catherine mentioned, different schools are going to have different baseline requirements for the courses that you've taken over the course of high school. A very popular university system is the UC system in California, UC Berkeley, UCLA. They get hundreds of thousands of applications each year, literally, among all of them. And they have their baseline requirements, a couple of years of history, 4 years of English, 3 years of math, 2 years of a language, for example. High schools will have their own requirements, and there's differences in how well these two sets of requirements overlap. But as Catherine said, you can go to each school that you may be preliminarily interested in and get a sense of what their baseline requirements are. But for example, taking 4 years of a language really helps most applicants who are trying to go to one of the UCs, for example. It shows dedication. It shows an exceptional degree of competence in something that isn't necessarily required by the school. That really matters. You know, if you're an aspiring, STEM student, as Catherine mentioned, you'll probably want to take 4 years of math. You'll try to get through certainly pre-calc, maybe even calculus or AP calculus by, the end of your senior year. So it's a great thing to have on your radar screen as you start researching schools and learning what the requirements are. These baseline benchmarks are really useful. And we encourage you to research them at the schools you're looking into. But know that this is not really what defines application success when the time comes to apply. And those 4 years of a language, et cetera, that we've described, these are things that as counselors, we can help you decide based on your direction. Looking ahead to extracurricular activities, this is a really fun part of our job, I think, Catherine. How do you talk to families where they have kids just starting out in high school about what should we do? We're so excited. We're at high school now. There's so many opportunities.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's one of the most exciting parts about going into high school because, there's obviously middle school clubs and middle school extracurriculars, but high school is sort of where this entire realm blows up in this very exciting way. So I think the easiest way to talk about it is just to sort of take it chronologically and look at sort of the extracurricular journey, if you will, from a chronological standpoint. So starting with sophomore year, sorry, why did we start sophomore year? Starting with freshman year, starting with the first year of high school, freshman year. Really that is the year for exploration and trying really everything that seems potentially interesting to you. So, whether it's water polo, Harry Potter club, knitting club, video game club, really whatever it is, getting a job outside of school. Freshman year is where we want to sort of experiment in different areas and to really find, okay, this is something that I'm interested in, and this is something that I can pursue for the long term. So once we've kind of had that really great foundational year, the idea would hopefully be that you finish freshman year with, I would say, a small handful of different extracurriculars that interest you. For some people, that's 2, and they're like, I really want to commit to these 2. For some people, that's 5, but it does not need to be 10, 15 by any means. And sophomore year is really where we focus on those passions. So you start to commit to the, handful of different extracurriculars, whether that's, I'm going to babysit 3 days a week and do field hockey the other day and, play music the last day. Finding that small handful of sophomore years where we want to commit to that sort of group of activities. And then looking forward, again, we are talking more about freshman and sophomore year, but this is all sort of with an eye to junior and senior year, where we really want to find leadership opportunities if they exist. Obviously in every extracurricular, let's say you have a part-time job as a waiter, leadership might not be a possibility there, but we also want to look for opportunities that show initiative. So whether it's starting your own project or creating a smaller, group within a club, anything that can show that you really advanced on those foundational years. That's what we're sort of building towards here. So freshman year is your exploration, sophomore year is really your solidifying. And we've got a list of things here, it's probably 7 or 8 different examples: sports, music, volunteering. I would say that this list could be 10 pages long. I often have students who will ask me, oh, does this extracurricular count for college? I didn't know that it counted. And, there's obviously exceptions, but by and large, if it's something that you are passionate about and something that contributes to your community and enhances you as a person, it is a worthwhile and valuable extracurricular. And yeah, I think that the last thing that I would sort of end the discussion with about extracurriculars on is sort of this idea that, we're always aiming for quality over quantity. So I think at some point a myth was sort of created amongst sort of the college application sphere that each applicant needs to be a jack of all trades, needs to be, chasing this idea of well-roundedness. When in reality, colleges want someone who's got passions and who's engaging with those passions. and it doesn't have to be in every single field. It can just be in the fields that interest you. And your early years of high school are all about finding what those are to you specifically. And yeah, maybe Brad, you can just talk for a minute about sort of the looking a little bit ahead to how colleges might consider your extracurricular activities.
Yeah, well, you did a great job covering the basics for those first couple of years. Quality over quantity is really key. And I think that the big thing, how do you think about quality really? What does that mean? Colleges are interested in a few things in particular. They're interested in, as Catherine said, just to reiterate her point, how are you giving back to your community? How are you contributing value to a group of people, to a neighborhood, to a school, to a set of employees, your colleagues potentially at a job? Your ability to contribute value to a community or a set of communities is one of the ways that colleges are going to start thinking about, well, what are you going to do when you join our community? It doesn't have to be the same thing. So if you're in that Harry Potter club all 4 years of high school, it's not that colleges are wondering, I wonder how much the student will contribute to our Harry Potter club here on campus. But, this dedicated contribution to a group of people discussing a topic of interest, shows these different attributes, these different inclinations and aptitudes, this instinct to contribute, to join, to help, to lead. The other thing that I would like to just point out is one of the biggest things that, families and students even ask me is, well, I've been working at the restaurant for 3 years. Is that just a job? That's not an extracurricular. It's like, no, that's an extracurricular as well. The ability to show financial independence, initiative, get your hands dirty, do, just a normal job that shows authenticity, that really grounds a lot of students who otherwise might have, a lot of these other opportunities that aren't as day to day, but working a job over time shows that dedication, that grit. So those are fantastic opportunities. And, even when kids are light on extracurriculars going into the summer before their senior year, I often recommend try to get a part-time job. That will help really round out all of these other amazing, academic achievements or volunteer achievements or so forth, but show your maturity, go get a job. And it's also just fantastic life experience too. So those are a couple things I would add. Otherwise, I think you did a great job, laying this out, Catherine.
Great.
Now, one thing that I've heard a lot of questions about is this category of demonstrated interest, which is a big part of applications once you're a junior and a senior. But what does this mean, and how do you engage demonstrated interest as a freshman and a sophomore? Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, demonstrated interest breaks down into two parts. Demonstrating interest in colleges over time, tremendously useful to parents and students. There are many, many schools to choose from, and it's hard to understand where to even begin when you're starting to put your college list together as a rising senior. If you haven't done sustained investigation, if you haven't had a chance to visit any schools virtually or in person over the years. So starting right with freshman year, we would certainly recommend, freshmen and sophomores begin researching schools, following their social media accounts. Most schools have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube pages. And one of the best things about Instagram, for example, is that a lot of that content is student generated. So you're not just getting the ultra curated, highlights of the university or college that you're interested in, but you're getting student perspectives. And that can really help you understand what it's like to, be a student at the school, just day to day, what it's like to be a part of that community. Joining emailing lists and opening those emails every time you receive them, even registering for information sessions. Some of those are live. That's a great opportunity to hear from current administrators and current students. So all of this obviously translates into building a foundation of knowledge so that this landscape of countless schools isn't so intimidating when it's time to decide which of them do I apply to. But it also works in another very powerful way. Schools are capturing all of this demonstrated interest activity as a part of your application profile when you submit an application. And they will know, boy, this particular applicant has been following us on social media, opening all our emails, attended 4 information sessions, and did a virtual tour over the last 3 years. We feel confident that if we give this student an acceptance offer, he or she will attend. And that's really powerful because frankly, a lot of universities and colleges are businesses, and a big metric of their success is yield, which is to say how many applicants that they extend an offer of acceptance to will actually attend. They want that number to be as high as possible, and they're judging that in part based on your demonstrated interest. So this is tough for us to catch up on as a rising senior. So getting started early as a freshman and certainly as a sophomore is tremendously useful. So Catherine, we've kind of fire hosed people with a lot of different things to think about, freshman and sophomore year, but what does this boil down to when people are starting high school?
Yeah, I think that, if I were to sort of leave everyone here with one final thought, it would be this idea that learning how to move and progress through high school thoughtfully and intentionally will help you apply to college better. So what that really means for me is starting to think about all of these things, whether it's demonstrated interest, whether it's, courses and grades, within a landscape of applying to college will actually just make your high school experience that much more rewarding. So I think the language example is such a great one of like, okay, I heard once that colleges, think that it's better to take 4 years of a language. Great, that's the starting point. But the end result for that is like, okay, I'm going to take a language that I really like because I know I'm going to be in this for 4 years, and I'm going to study a language for 4 years. And I think anyone who's ever done that looks back on it and it's like, that was a pretty incredible and rewarding experience. So yeah, just to end with this idea that a powerful and productive and enjoyable high school experience goes hand in hand with applying to college successfully. But yeah, I'd love, Brad, to hear your thoughts on kind of how the college counselor fits into that process.
Yeah, well, one of the big sort of themes of reflections on high school and applying to college that you and I hear a lot is, from parents in particular, boy, I wish if I could go back and do high school again, or go back and do the college application process again, if I'd known then what I know now, et cetera. Well, that's kind of our job. As college counselors, we've gone through this cycle countless times with countless students. We've really learned, that taking advantage of high school from day one really helps you optimize the lived experience of high school and really helps you optimize your ability to apply to the right fit college when the time comes. So, reiterating all of those things, finding your academic strengths and challenging yourself early, as Catherine said, recognizing very early on that you are an important member of your community and figuring out how you can add value in a way that makes you happy, in a way that makes you, helps you really just enjoy day after day of those 4 years of high school. It's just a win-win because it will also help you apply to colleges, much more compellingly. Taking chances is another one that, Catherine iterated early on. You have that opportunity, you have that flexibility as a freshman. Honing in once you've done that is much easier if you've sampled more things. So yeah, we are in the business of not just helping, students apply to college, but helping them really enjoy the process. As cliche as we all know that might sound, mitigating stress is one of the major ways that we help you do that. And starting early with this process and linking up with a college counselor early is incredibly effective at mitigating stress later. And I think I created a new word earlier, tremendously. So tremendously helpful when we hear from parents when their kids are just starting high school. It really opens it up for us, and it opens it up for the parents as well to really make sure that high school is a joy and something that can be always remembered very fondly and is also very productive. So we appreciate everybody stopping by. Here's our contact information. Our emails are on the screen. We would welcome any follow-ups after today's presentation. If you have questions, if you'd like to learn more about working with a counselor at ESM, you can certainly jump on esmprep.com to sort of see a snapshot of our entire company. We have a lot of really awesome people and a deep bench of mentors for academics and test prep, in addition to counselors like Catherine and myself. So we hope that you've gotten a lot out of this. And if anybody has any questions, we would be happy to take them.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I think, it's honestly such a pleasure really to talk about those early years of high school, sort of before, let's say, the junior and senior years that get a lot of attention. So it's really, I think, great to be here and to be talking about it. Great. Perfect. I think we will just leave it there then. Anything else from your end, Brett?
Nope, nope.
Perfect.
I encourage you guys to reach out if anything does come up. But Catherine, thank you. This was great.
Thanks, everyone.